Good morning, students. Today we are going to see our next topic, that is nutritional types of bacteria. What are nutritional types of bacteria? See here, the bacteria which feed on nutrition. What is it? It requires organic nutrients, inorganic nutrients. From where it can synthesize? It can synthesize on its own. Some bacteria can synthesize the food on its own. Some are dependent on other microorganisms or other living organisms for their food. That means they can be just like they can synthesize their own food, or they are dependent on other organisms for their food. That food itself is known as nutrition. Based on the nutrition which they are eating, and what is the mode of nutrition, what is the mode of getting the nutrition, based on that the microorganisms are of two types. That is known as your nutritional types of bacteria. That means for its living, bacteria is dependent on food material. That food material is known as nutrition. So for this, what is happening is the bacteria, it is dependent on other organisms for its food. So based on that type of nutrition or mode of nutrition, the bacteria are of mainly classified into two types. One is autotrophs, second one is heterotrophs. All of you know these words since your childhood, that is in schooling itself you must have studied this, the difference between autotrophs and heterotrophs, or at least you must have heard these words, autotrophs and heterotrophs. What are autotrophs? Autotrophs are the organisms which can synthesize their own food. Heterotrophs means these are the organisms which can synthesize, which cannot synthesize their food, they are dependent on other organisms for their food. Such organisms are called heterotrophs. Here, according to this nutritional types of bacteria, same definition only, but in a twisted manner I am going to tell you. What are autotrophs? Autotrophs are the organisms which use external energy, see here, which use external energy and synthesize their food. What is the external energy? It may be carbon dioxide, or it may be sunlight, or it may be whatever it may be, which is present in the external environment, that will be taken as an energy and they synthesize their food. So autotrophs are the organisms which use energy from the external source or external environment, which use energy from the external environment and synthesize organic nutrients. These are called as autotrophs. In short, we will call them as these are the organisms which can synthesize their own food material. Now coming to the heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are the organisms which are dependent on the organic nutrients. That means they cannot synthesize their food, they are not dependent on the energy, because they are not getting energy, they are not taking up energy from the external environment, simply they are dependent on organic nutrients. That means they will feed on organic nutrients. That means, in other words, in simple words, heterotrophs are the organisms which cannot synthesize their own food, they are dependent on other organisms for their food material. So they are called as heterotrophs. Now coming to the next one, the nutritional types of bacteria. The bacteria, based on the nutritional type, they are again classified based on the type of energy source they are absorbing and based on the carbon source they are absorbing. That means two things are essential for the synthesis of food. They are energy source and carbon source. These are the two sources by which the organism can synthesize its food, or by which it is dependent on other organisms for its food. First is your energy source. That means the first classification is based on energy source. What is energy source? See here, the energy source is phototrophs, next is chemotrophs. See here, there are two types of organisms, the organisms are bacteria are classified, the microorganisms are classified into two types depending on the type of energy source they are absorbing for the synthesis of their food or for their food material. The type of energy, whatever its use may be, the type of energy that is absorbed by the organisms, based on that the external energy that is present in the environment, which type of energy they are absorbing from the external environment, based on that the organisms are of two types, they are phototrophs and chemotrophs. The name itself indicates that phototrophs are the organisms which will get, they use sunlight as the, see here, which use sunlight as the external source of energy. Phototrophs are the organisms which use sunlight as the source of energy. Coming to the chemotrophs, the name itself indicates that the organisms use, or the organisms utilize chemicals as the source of energy. What are the chemicals here? They may be minerals, vitamins, nutrients, or whatever it may be. The chemical materials are used as the source of energy instead of light. In chemotrophs, light do not play an important role. Only chemicals are the source of energy. The source of energy in chemotrophs is only chemicals, and these organisms, they will show their activity even in the dark. They do not require the presence of light. So, in the absence of light also, they can use the energy that is from the chemicals, they can use the energy, they can get the energy, or they can use the energy from the chemical sources, and they can synthesize their own food material. These are called chemotrophs and phototrophs. Based on this classification is based on the energy source. Coming to the carbon source, see here, coming to the carbon source. The carbon sources are of two types. See here, the carbon sources are of two types. They are the organisms which use carbon dioxide as their prime source. Again, see here, based on the carbon source, they are of autotrophs, heterotrophs. Again, I am repeating the same thing, autotrophs, heterotrophs. See here, that means the same classification I am giving based on the carbon source. Now, what are autotrophs and what are heterotrophs? Everybody till now you must be knowing that what are autotrophs, which can synthesize their own food material by absorbing by taking the external energy from the environment. Heterotrophs, they cannot synthesize their own food material, they are directly dependent on the organic nutrients that are synthesized by other organisms. They will feed on the food material that is synthesized by other organisms. But here, according to carbon source, what are autotrophs? Autotrophs are the organisms which utilize carbon dioxide as the carbon source. See here, these are the organisms which utilize carbon dioxide as the carbon source. That means the autotrophs are the organisms. According to this classification, the definition of autotrophs is that the autotrophs are the organisms which utilize carbon dioxide as the carbon source. They are called autotrophs. Coming to the heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are the organisms which utilize, see here, inorganic and organic. See here, inorganic and organic carbon is used as a carbon source. Heterotrophs are the organisms which utilize either inorganic or organic substances as a carbon source. Not only carbon, you can call it as inorganic and organic substances can be used as a carbon source. Such type of organisms are called heterotrophs. Again, I will repeat it. According to the nutritional types of bacteria, bacteria absorb nutrients. Either they can synthesize the nutrients, or they are dependent on other organisms, and they can get the nutrients. They are dependent on other organisms for their food. Now, coming to that, based on that, the autotrophs, the bacteria or microorganisms are, the microorganisms are classified into autotrophs and heterotrophs. What are autotrophs? These are the organisms which are dependent on the external source of energy, or they are dependent on the external source of energy from the environment for the preparation or synthesis of organic material. They are called autotrophs. In other words, these are the organisms, autotrophs are the organisms which can synthesize their own food material. Coming to the heterotrophs, these are the organisms which are dependent on organic nutrients. In other words, or in simple words, heterotrophs are the organisms, or in other words, heterotrophs are the organisms which cannot synthesize their own food material. They are dependent on other organisms for their food material. They are called heterotrophs. Now coming to the, based on the energy source and based on the carbon source, the organisms, the microorganisms, for their the nutritional types of bacteria are classified into these types. In the energy source, the classification is phototrophs and chemotrophs. Phototrophs means these are the organisms, they are dependent on the sunlight or light as the source of energy. That is, photo means light. Chemical to the second one is coming to the chemotrophs. These are the organisms which will get the energy source from chemicals. They use chemicals as the energy source. They are called chemotrophs, that is, chemo means chemicals. Now coming to the carbon source. Based on the carbon source, organisms or microorganisms are classified, or based on the carbon source, microorganisms are classified into two types, autotrophs and heterotrophs, which the organisms that are using which type of carbon. That means autotrophs are the organisms, they directly use carbon dioxide as the carbon source, and heterotrophs are the organisms that use organic and inorganic substances as their carbon source. Now coming to the next one. Next classification is, I am mixing these two. That means without energy and without carbon dioxide there is no synthesis of food. So here they are of two types. One is photo autotrophs, second one is chemo autotrophs. Okay, photo autotrophs and chemo autotrophs. Second one is, see here, next one is, they are photo heterotrophs, second one is chemo heterotrophs. Okay, these are the two types of classifications. One is photo autotrophs, chemo autotrophs. Second one is photo heterotrophs, chemo heterotrophs. Now see here, coming to the photo autotrophs, let us define this. What are photo autotrophs? Photo autotrophs are the organisms which can synthesize their food material because they are autotrophs. First autotroph definition cheppandi. Autotroph definition. These are the organisms, these are the microorganisms that can synthesize their own food material. First one. Second one, these are the organisms, these are the microorganisms that are dependent on the light as the energy source. Light as the energy source. Now these are the microorganisms that take up carbon dioxide as the carbon source. Chudandama, 3 kalipanu nenu. These are the autotrophs which can synthesize their own food material by using external energy source and synthesize the organic materials. Next, these are the organisms that can use sunlight as the source of energy. These are the organisms that use carbon dioxide as the source of energy. Okay, carbon dioxide as the source as a carbon source. Now these organisms, they can synthesize their own food, so they should have chlorophyll. Is it or not? They should have chlorophyll. In bacterial organisms, where you can see chlorophyll? In cyanobacteria or blue green algae. So the best example here is blue green algae or cyanobacteria. Okay. Example is cyanobacteria, nostoc, oscillatoria, anabina. All these are, they come under photoautotrophs because they have chlorophyll and they can synthesize their chlorophyll is, they can synthesize, the chlorophyll is green in color and it consists of it produces a starch called as blue starch or cyanophycean starch. For that reason these are known as blue green algae. The cyanophycean starch that is synthesized after photosynthesis by cyanobacteria is blue in color, so it is known as blue green algae, or it is also known as cyanophycean starch. So it is known as blue, which is the cyanophycean starch is blue in color, so it is known as blue green algae. Then why I am using green, word green? Because it consists of chlorophyll. Is it okay? Now coming to the chemoautotrophs, again same definition. These are the organisms which can synthesize their own food material by using external source of energy, and they synthesize organic nutrients. First one. Second one, these are the organisms which use chemicals as the energy source. Second one. Next, these are the organisms which use carbon dioxide as the carbon source. Okay. Autotrophs definition 1, chemoautotrophs, chemicals, and again autotroph definition this one, carbon source, based on the carbon source. So chemoautotrophs are the organisms which can synthesize their food material by using the external source of energy, and they synthesize organic nutrients. First definition. Okay. Second definition, these are the organisms which use chemicals as the energy source. Second definition. Coming to the third definition, these are the organisms which utilize or which use carbon dioxide as the carbon source for the synthesis of their nutrients. This is the third definition. Now these chemoautotrophs, they work in the, they synthesize the food material, organic nutrients, in the absence of light. They can synthesize in the absence of light. They can utilize from where they will get the chemical and carbon dioxide source. These chemoautotrophs, they synthesize the carbon source, or they will be getting the carbon source by oxidation of some of the compounds like your ammonia, nitrogen dioxide and hydrogen. By oxidizing these substances, these organisms, they can get carbon as carbon source. That means by oxidizing these substances, chemicals, they will be synthesizing, they will be getting the nutrients. Okay, carbon dioxide as the nutrients. This is about the chemoautotroph. These chemoautotrophs, example is nitrosomonas, nitrobacter, nitrosomonas. So nitrobacter and nitrosomonas are the organisms, best examples of your chemoautotrophs. Now coming to the chemoautotrophs only, as these organisms, they show their activity in the absence of light, and they are dependent on the chemicals, minerals as the source of energy. So these can also be called as chemolithotrophs. What is the meaning of chemo? Chemical. Litho means rock. Litho means rocks. So from the mineral rocks it is getting the energy. So it is known as chemolithotroph, or they can also be called as chemoautotrophs or chemolithotrophs, because the chemicals are there, it is getting the chemicals as the energy source from the rocks, that is minerals from the rocks. So these are called as chemolithotrophs. Now coming to the photoheterotrophs. Photoheterotrophs are the organisms. The heterotrophs, again three definitions. First one is, the heterotrophs are the organisms, they cannot synthesize their own food material. First one. Second one, these are the heterotrophs which are dependent on other organisms for the organic nutrients. Coming to the third, these are the organisms, they are dependent on light, sunlight as the external source of energy. Fourth definition, these are the organisms, they are dependent on your inorganic and organic substances as carbon source. Chudandama, heterotrophs are the organisms, they cannot synthesize their own food material, they are dependent on other organisms for their food material in the form of organic nutrients. Next definition, photoautotrophs are the heterotrophs are the organisms that are dependent on sunlight as the external energy source. Photoheterotrophs are the organisms, they are dependent on organic and inorganic substances as a carbon source. That means, see here, organic and inorganic substances as a carbon source. So, see here, then you can ask me a question that what is the necessity of energy source, what is the necessity of carbon dioxide source, carbon source, because they are no way synthesizing the food material, they are not at all synthesizing the food material, they are dependent on other organisms for their food material. Then why they are dependent on energy source, why they are dependent on carbon source, is it or not? So, these photoheterotrophs, though they cannot synthesize their food material, they can absorb the food material from other organisms, but for absorbing the nutrients from other organisms also, it requires certain conditions. What are the conditions? Energy source and carbon source. When these two are satisfied, then only they can absorb. Second thing, when the organism is synthesizing the food in the presence of this energy source and carbon source, then only these heterotrophs will absorb the nutrients from that organism. That means, the condition is that though they are feeding on another organism, though they are dependent on another organism for its food, it won't take the food from any organism. ఎక్కడో చోట ఉన్న ఏదో ఒక దాని మీద నుంచి అది తినదు. ఎప్పుడు తింటుంది? ఇఫ్ ది ఆర్గానిజం హ్యాస్ సింథసైజ్డ్ ఇట్స్ ఫుడ్ మెటీరియల్ బై టేకింగ్ ఎనర్జీ సోర్స్ అండ్ కార్బన్ సోర్స్, then it is synthesizing its food. From such organisms only the heterotroph will feed on that. The heterotroph will take food material from such type of organism which is synthesizing its food material by depending on the energy source, external energy source and external carbon source. When these are satisfied, then only from such type of organism only the heterotrophs will take the food material. So, the heterotrophs, they require external energy source, that is light as an external energy source. Second one is they require carbon as an external energy source. Then only from such autotrophs only it is taking the food material, it is feeding on that, or it is consuming the organic nutrients from such type of organisms. So, they are called photoheterotrophs. Next thing, the example for photoheterotrophs is blue green fungi. See here, blue green fungi, or you can call it blue green fungi or molds. Example is photoheterotrophs. Coming to the chemoheterotrophs, again three definitions. Heterotrophs are the organisms which cannot synthesize their own food material. First one, they are dependent on other organisms for their organic nutrients. Second definition, chemo or heterotrophs are the organisms which are dependent on chemicals, minerals as the external energy source. Chemicals and minerals as the external energy source, they are dependent on chemicals as an energy source. Third definition, these chemoheterotrophs are the organisms which are dependent on either organic or inorganic substances as carbon source. Again the same thing, chemoheterotrophs are the organisms, they are dependent on the other organisms for their organic nutrients, for their nutrition, but they are dependent on such type of organisms which are taking chemicals as the energy source and inorganic or organic substances as carbon source. After taking these two, energy source and carbon source, if they are synthesizing the food, from such organisms only it consumes the food. So such type of organisms are called chemoheterotrophs. Example is Xanthomonas, Pseudomonas, etc. Fungi, etc. Xanthomonas, fungi, Pseudomonas, or Xanthomonas, Pseudomonas, fungi, etc. This is another type of classification. Coming to the next one, the heterotrophs. See here, heterotrophs are classified into another, they show another type of classification. Heterotrophs are again classified into three types. They are saprophytes, or you can give easily parasites, saprophytes, and symbionts. Okay, these are the three different types of organisms based on their nutrition. They are parasites, saprophytes, and symbionts. That means anyway you know that heterotrophs are the organisms, they are dependent on other organisms for their food. If they are dependent on other organisms for their food material, in what is the manner or what is the mechanism by which they are absorbing the food material from other organisms? Based on that, the heterotrophs for consuming their food, for the consumption of their food, what are the different types of feeding patterns? One is parasite. These are the organisms. The definitions of these three you must be knowing. Already you must be knowing. You get bored because I am again and again I am repeating it. Parasites are the organisms which are dependent on your other organisms for their food. That means they will sit on another organism and they will feed on that organism. Example is nothing but your Pseudomonas. Example is your Pseudomonas. That means this organism, it sits on other organism like Clostridium. These organisms, they will sit on another organism and they will start feeding on that organism. That means simply they will sit on the surface of another organism and they will produce Yashodara like structures and they will pierce through the skin, they pierce through the surface and enter into the cells and start absorbing the nutrients. This is known as a parasitic type of, these are known as parasitic type of heterotrophs. Coming to the saprophytes. Saprophytes are the organisms that are dependent on a dead and decaying organisms for their food. That means they will sit on other organisms for their food. Dead and decaying organisms, they will sit on them and they will feed on that. So they are called as saprophytes, and this example for this is bacillus. Okay, the example for this is bacillus. Next thing, these saprophytes, as they are present in the environment and they are feeding on a dead and decaying organisms. అంటే ఏంటి, ఎక్కడో చోట ఒక చోట ఏదో చనిపోయింది యానిమల్, ఆ యానిమల్ని మన మున్సిపాలిటీ వాళ్ళు తీయట్లేదు, లేకపోతే సిటీలో అయితే మున్సిపాలిటీ వాళ్ళు తీస్తారు. అదే కనుక ఫారెస్ట్లో అయితే ఒక యానిమల్ చనిపోయింది, ఒక లయన్ వచ్చి ఒక డీర్ని చంపింది, ఆ డీర్ చనిపోయి అక్కడ పడుంది, అది తిన్నంత తిని వెళ్ళిపోయింది. వుల్ఫ్స్ తర్వాత ఫాక్స్ వచ్చాయి, అవి తిన్నా వెళ్ళిపోయాయి, మిగతా పార్ట్ అట్లనే పడుంది ఫ్లెష్. దాని మీద ఈ saprophytic microorganisms, they will feed on that and they will convert the organic nutrients that are present in the body of the animal, dead animal or dead and decaying organism, and they will convert into simple substances. That means the complex substances are converted into simple substances. That is, a complex polysaccharide is broken into small glucose like that. Next, a complex lipid is converted into fatty acids. A complex protein is converted into amino acids. That means the saprophytes are the organisms that feed on dead and decaying organisms, and they will sit on the organism and they produce enzymes called lysozymes, and they convert the complex substances, organic substances, into simple organic substances, and they will feed on that. In such a manner, they are cleaning up the environment That means after few days that animal is not seen on the earth. Why? Because it is taken, consumed by the bacteria. So these saprophytes are also known as scavengers. Scavengers of environment. They are cleaning the environment. They are cleaning up the environment. Now coming to the symbionts. These are the organisms. They will sit on another organism. They do not feed simply on that organism, but what they will do is they feed on that organism, and they will in turn they will benefit the organism. That means they will give food material, they will feed on that organism, they will start taking food material from the organism. First one. Second one is in turn they will do some benefit to the organism. This is known as your symbiont. Example is your fungi. See here, fungi sitting on the roots. See here, fungi sitting on the roots. Example is cycas. Fungi will sit on the root system of the cycas plant. They will absorb the nutrients from the cycas plant. In turn, what they will do is they will absorb the phosphate from the environment and give it to that. Example, next example is rhizobium. Rhizobium bacteria will sit on the surface of the roots of legume plants. They will enter into the cells of the legume plant roots. The rhizobium bacteria enter into the cells of the roots of legume plants, and they will feed on that legume plant. They will get the nutrients or food material from the legume plant roots, the cells of the legume plant roots, and in turn they will fix the atmospheric nitrogen and convert it into nitrate form and give it to the plant, give it to the roots of the legume plant. That means both are benefited to each other. That means root is giving food material to the organism, and organism is giving phosphate and nitrates to the plant material, to the cells of the roots of plant material. This is known as symbiotic association, mutually benefiting each other. These are the different nutritional types of bacteria. So today students will stop here, and in the next class we will continue with the next topic. Okay students, thank you.